The Indian War, a long and painful chapter in the history of the American frontier, had finally come to an end. After years of fighting, misunderstandings, and heartache, both settlers and Native American tribes sought a path toward peace. The smoke of battle had cleared, leaving behind a fragile hope that a new beginning could emerge. People yearned for a time when they could coexist without fear or hostility. In the wake of war, towns began to rebuild. Families who had fled their homes were slowly returning, trying to patch together the remnants of their lives. Children laughed in the streets once again, and farmers tended to their fields with renewed determination, believing that brighter days lay ahead. For many Native Americans, this period marked a chance to restore their way of life. They attempted to heal their communities and engage in dialogue with settlers. The promise of peace lingered in the air, offering everyone an opportunity to understand one another better. However, this new atmosphere would soon be tested. Not everyone was committed to peace. As settlers began to dream of what could be, there were still those who clung to old fears and negative stereotypes about Native Americans. It was during this delicate time that whispers of deceit began to circulate, whispers that would threaten to unravel the hard-won harmony. Little did they know that one rancher's lies would spark a chain reaction, pushing both sides toward yet another conflict that no one saw coming. In the aftermath of the Indian War, several key figures emerged from both the settler and Native American communities, each playing a crucial role in shaping the future. At the center of this story was a white rancher named Tom Dutton. Rugged and determined, he saw land as a means to power and prosperity. With a history of success in ranching, Dutton had always wanted more. He craved respect and influence among his peers, which led him down a dark path of deceit. Among the settlers, families like the Millers and Johnsons were trying to rebuild their lives after losing so much during the war. They nurtured dreams of cultivating farmland and starting anew. However, some in the community were gripped by fear and distrust towards Native Americans, influenced by stories passed down through generations that painted them in a negative light. On the other side, Native American tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne sought peace after many years of loss and conflict. Their leaders encouraged dialogue with settlers, hoping to build bridges instead of walls. Yet old tensions simmered just below the surface. The scars of war were still fresh for both sides, making it hard to forget past grievances. As Dutton's inflammatory words began to spread, he unknowingly fanned the flames of mistrust among neighbors who had just started to find common ground. The relationships among these groups remained fragile, teetering on the brink of disaster as they stood at a crossroads between peace and renewed conflict. Tom Dutton was not just any rancher. He was a man driven by ambition and a thirst for power that shaped his every decision. Growing up as the son of a poor farmer, Dutton had witnessed firsthand the struggles of those who lived on the edge of survival. His family lost everything during the war, leading him to believe that land was the key to security and respect. He worked tirelessly to establish his ranch, becoming known for his skill in raising cattle and his knack for turning a profit. Yet, as he gained success, so did his desire for more. The peace following the Indian War created an opportunity he couldn't resist. More land meant more influence. Dutton felt that by spreading fear and suspicion about Native Americans, he could manipulate the settlers' anxieties to push them to support his expansion plans. He began to share exaggerated stories of violent encounters with tribes, painting them as threats rather than neighbors. His motivations stemmed from both personal ambition and a need for validation among his peers. Dutton craved respect in a community still healing from conflict, believing that by positioning himself as a protector of settlers, he would earn their loyalty. However, this quest for power came at a cost. With every lie he told, he tightened the grip of fear on the community, setting off a chain reaction that threatened not only their fragile peace, but also their very future together. As Tom Dutton's ambitions grew, so did the fabrications he spun about the Native American tribes in the region. He began by claiming that a nearby tribe, once friendly and cooperative, had secretly plotted to reclaim their ancestral lands. His exaggerations painted them as dangerous and deceitful, suggesting they were hoarding weapons and preparing for an attack on settlers. These tales, shared around campfires and in local saloons, ignited fear among families trying to heal from the scars of war. Dutton didn't stop at mere rumors. He crafted elaborate stories of violent encounters that never happened. He described supposed raids on settlers' farms, where Native Americans had stolen livestock or threatened women and children. Each tale became more sensational than the last, stirring anxiety among neighbors who had just begun to trust one another again. His claims were persuasive enough to sway many settlers into believing they needed protection from these so-called threats. The growing fear led families to band together for safety, often arming themselves against an enemy that existed only in Dutton's imagination. Conversations that once focused on rebuilding the community now turned to discussions of defense strategies and barricading homes. As Dutton's lies spread like wildfire, tension escalated dramatically. Settlers who had once sought peace found themselves questioning their neighbors and fearing for their lives. The very foundation of trust was crumbling under the weight of Dutton's deceit, pushing both communities closer to the brink of renewed conflict. As Dutton's tales spread through the community, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Settlers who were once filled with hope now looked at each other with suspicion. Conversations that had previously revolved around farming and rebuilding soon turned into anxious discussions about safety and defense. Families began to gather in small groups, sharing their fears of looming attacks that Dutton had fabricated. Panic settled over the community like a dark cloud, causing many to lock their doors at night and keep watch for enemy raiders. The local meeting hall, a place once used for sharing news and community events, became a site of tension where people debated the need for weapons and security measures. Trust diminished as neighbors whispered rumors that further fueled the anxiety. Children were no longer allowed to play outside freely, as parents worried about potential dangers lurking nearby. Merchants noticed fewer visitors in their shops, as people hesitated to venture out unless absolutely necessary. The settlers' cooperative spirit crumbled under the weight of fear, transforming casual friendships into alliances based on paranoia. Native Americans, who had once been welcomed members of the community, suddenly faced hostility and distrust. Settlers began to view them with suspicion, assuming they were part of a hidden danger rather than individuals seeking peace. The delicate fabric of coexistence that had begun to weave itself after the war was quickly unraveling, driven by Dutton's deceitful claims and the panic they inspired among the settlers. As the clouds of suspicion gathered over the settlers, Native American tribes felt the weight of Dutton's lies pressing down on their efforts for peace. Leaders like Chief Gray Hawk and Elder Moonlight worked tirelessly to maintain open lines of communication with settlers, hoping to quell the rising tide of fear. They believed that by offering their friendship and sharing their stories, they could demonstrate their true intentions and remind the community of the bonds they had built during better times. However, with each passing day, it became increasingly difficult for tribes to defuse the tension. Settlers, influenced by Dutton's fabrications, began to withdraw from any interaction. The once vibrant exchange of goods and culture turned into cautious glances and whispered fears. Native Americans who had previously walked freely among settlers now found themselves scrutinized and unwelcome. Realizing the danger that lay ahead, Native tribes organized meetings to discuss strategies for self-defense while still advocating for peace. They trained in traditional ways, preparing for potential conflicts that they never wanted but felt were becoming inevitable. Despite their efforts to reach out and clarify misunderstandings, they faced hostility and aggression from those too frightened to see beyond Dutton's deceptions. In this challenging environment, some Native leaders even proposed creating a council to bridge the gap between tribes and settlers. Yet, hope seemed elusive as Dutton's influence continued to loom large, threatening to shatter the fragile peace they all sought. Tensions rose as both sides prepared for an uncertain future, caught in a cycle of fear that Dutton had set in motion. As more settlers fell under the sway of Dutton's tales, the atmosphere in the community became increasingly volatile. What began as whispers of fear quickly escalated into heated confrontations. Small groups of settlers began patrolling the streets at night, convinced they were defending their families from impending attacks. The tension simmered just below the surface, waiting for a single spark to ignite chaos. One evening, a group of settlers, armed and anxious, confronted a small party of Native Americans who were peacefully gathering berries near the edge of town. Misunderstandings erupted into shouts and accusations, with settlers insisting the Native Americans were scouting for a raid. In a moment of panic, one settler drew his firearm, and before anyone could react, a shot rang out. The sound shattered the fragile peace, sending waves of fear through both communities. The Native Americans fled the scene, but not before leaving behind an innocent bystander who had been caught in the crossfire. This tragic incident ignited further violence, as both sides rallied their respective groups. Dutton's lies had now manifested into reality, fueled by fear and misunderstanding. In the days that followed, more skirmishes erupted as tensions mounted. Settlers would retaliate against any perceived threat from Native Americans, and in turn, tribes fortified their camps in preparation for what they believed was an inevitable fight for survival. The once shared hopes for peace faded away, replaced by hostility and aggression that threatened to plunge the region into another bloody conflict, one born solely from Dutton's deceitful ambitions. As violence escalated in the community, law enforcement officials found themselves caught in an increasingly difficult situation. The local sheriff, Sheriff Thompson, had hoped to maintain peace but felt overwhelmed by the growing tensions between settlers and Native Americans. He tried to instill calm through dialogue, urging residents to report any unlawful activity rather than taking matters into their own hands. However, his words often fell on deaf ears as fear clouded reason. Faced with a divided community, Sheriff Thompson organized patrols to provide security and monitor potential clashes. Yet, each patrol met with hostility from those who believed they were being protected from a threat that existed largely in their imagination. Dutton's lies had warped perceptions of the Native American tribes, leading many settlers to view law enforcement as ineffectual or even siding with the enemy. Government officials also struggled to manage the situation. Letters pleading for assistance reached higher authorities, but responses were slow and often dismissive. Without adequate support or intervention from state officials, local leaders felt helpless against the rising tide of violence. The strained relationship between law enforcement and the settlers made it even more challenging to restore peace. Instead of acting as mediators, officers often became scapegoats for the frustrations of the community. With both sides unwilling to back down and law enforcement unable to bridge the chasm created by Dutton's deceitful narratives, it seemed inevitable that conflict would continue to escalate until someone took decisive action, or tragedy struck once more. The situation reached a boiling point one fateful afternoon when a group of settlers, inflamed by Dutton's falsehoods, decided to confront a nearby Native American camp. They believed they were on a mission to protect their families from an impending attack that existed only in their imaginations. Tensions ran high as the settlers armed themselves with rifles and pitchforks, marching toward the camp with shouts and rallying cries. At the same time, Chief Gray Hawk had gathered his people for an important meeting. Unbeknownst to him, the invading settlers approached with hostility rather than dialogue. When the settlers arrived at the camp's edge, misunderstandings ignited an explosive confrontation. Both sides exchanged heated words before the situation escalated into chaos. As tempers flared, one settler, convinced that danger was imminent, fired his weapon into the air to intimidate those nearby. The shot rang out like thunder, sending panic rippling through both camps. In the ensuing chaos, misunderstandings led both sides to respond aggressively. Arrows flew from the Native Americans, while settlers retaliated with gunfire. The violence that erupted resulted in casualties on both sides. Families were torn apart by loss and grief. News spread quickly through neighboring settlements and tribes alike, fueling further hostilities and bringing more participants into what had now become an all-out confrontation. In the aftermath of this tragic event, trust was shattered beyond repair. The fragile hope for peace vanished as Dutton's lies had ultimately transformed into a violent reality that threatened to engulf everyone in its wake. In the aftermath of the violence ignited by Tom Dutton's lies, the community was left to grapple with the heavy consequences of misplaced trust and fear. Once hopeful relationships between settlers and Native Americans had disintegrated into bitter hostility, leaving scars that would take generations to heal. Families mourned their lost loved ones and the dreams of coexistence that had seemed so achievable just months before. The tragic events served as a stark reminder of how easily truth can be twisted and how quickly suspicion can spread like wildfire. Dutton's actions not only sparked a new conflict but also deepened the divisions within the community. Settlers learned that unchecked fears could lead to devastating consequences, while Native American tribes realized that even in a quest for peace, they could become targets of aggression based on false narratives. As time passed, both groups began to reflect on the lessons learned from this painful chapter. Conversations emerged about the importance of fostering understanding and building trust through honest communication. Community leaders from both sides sought ways to come together in shared grief and loss, recognizing that healing would require courage and compassion rather than more conflict. While the road to reconciliation would be long and arduous, it became clear that rebuilding trust was essential for a brighter future. The story of Dutton's deception served as a cautionary tale, one that emphasized the need for vigilance against lies and the power of truth in nurturing relationships within communities. Only by confronting their past could they hope to forge a path toward lasting peace.